personal situations, marital situations. Our loyalty isn't to each other. Our loyalty isn't to our wives. Our loyalty isn't to our families. Our loyalty is to Jesus Christ. Just this within this last week, it was real hot up in Oregon, and one of my daughter's friends, it was a good friend of our family, called her up and said, "Well, can we go up? I want to take some of my friends up to your property." And this is a true story. This is unbelievable. And Joy says, "Well, okay," and tried to give her directions because we sold the one piece and tried to give her directions for the piece we have. Well, they disregarded those directions and they went on down through this other person's property, which I sold, and went down to the creek and swam and stuff like that. Well, then the problem is the person that they brought left their phone. And so the next day they realized they left the phone down there. So rather than to contact my daughter's friend that took them down there to begin with, they just go back on down. Well, now the lady's home. So she sees this black car going through, and this is out in the wilderness. This is in the woods in the wilderness, and this gal's a doctor, and so they call the police and stuff. And I'm not fool. And that one thing I shouldn't say this on the camera, but it was the police. If you knew from the top of that hill to get down to the creek is really, really a trip. I mean, it's down, and to have to walk up it is something else. There was like 6 to 8 SWAT guys with M16s that went down there and caught these people swimming in the creek because they thought, well, maybe they were doing some illegal thing with drugs or maybe murdering somebody or something, because all she saw was the car head off onto her property into the woods, and she calls them. So they show up with all their SWAT team and everything, have to hike all the way down there and have to hike all the way up, and it was like 105 degrees or something. And so the girlfriend calls back my daughter, and because this whole thing got to be a real big deal, and so I get an email from the property owner describing all these circumstances, and that same day I get a call from the gal that took her friends down there, and she's a non-believer. And so I was able to say, "Hey, don't worry about it, that's cool," and stuff like that. And so then she talks to my daughter. My daughter and I calls me and says, "Man, I think that was such a great testimony that you gave to her. Man, that is really a good testimony, because you didn't show any anger, you didn't show any upsetness. You just said, that's fine, don't you worry about it. Things like this happen in life, and da da da." And rather than to create a big hostile environment over, look what you did with my relationship and my neighbor and all this stuff, This is fruit of the Spirit, and this is looking at the big picture rather than the small picture in dealing with people. And oftentimes what we get involved in is trying to protect our rights. And I'm saying, what rights do you really have when you're with Christ? What are your rights? What are your boundaries when you're with Jesus? And I'm simply saying that sometimes you erect these boundaries and rights that really don't exist at all. So here we are. We spent some time on perseverance, which is probably not too bad because it's very seldom that probably that's talked about. It talked about Patmos. It says that I am, because of the Word of God and the testimony, it says, "I, John, your brother, fellow partaker in the tribulations and kingdom and perseverance which are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos." Do any of you know where Patmos is?
It's off the coast of Turkey, west side of the coast of Turkey.
Yeah.
In the Aegean Sea.
I think it's in the Aegean Sea.
I got it.
Go ahead. You see it there?
Yeah, it's in the middle of the Great Sea, off of by, it looks like it's north of Jerusalem, and I guess west of Antioch, and
yeah,
it's in the middle. It's in the middle over the Great Sea.
Yeah, it's probably about, if I had to guess, it would probably be somewhere between 75 to 100 miles to the first of the 7 churches that were writing this letter to that's coming up. So all those 7 churches are within probably
Oh,
200 or 300 miles of the island of Patmos. It's Patmos is about it's in Turkey. It's off the shores of Turkey. Excuse me. It's about 37 miles from one of the main towns there in Turkey, which doesn't appear to be that far from the starting of the 7 churches. And it's mostly a volcanic type island with a lot of rock and you know, it's rolling hills, but it's pretty rough ground. It's about a 10-mile long island, and it's about 6 miles at the widest part. So here, Rome takes this island and says that's where we want to put our prisoners. It's kind of like the Alcatraz concept. I believe Australia was a prison camp to begin with. I think maybe England was, if I'm recalling. I think even I've heard Japan was. These islands were places that prisoners used to be put, and Patmos is a very small one compared to those that I mentioned. But that's where the Romans put their prisoners out on that island because they probably found it was pretty hard to escape. And what do you think it was like on that island back then for the prisoners?
Is it a desert island?
Pardon me?
Is it a desert island or a tropical island? It's desert because it's a
Well,
like that?
I would say that sometimes it can probably get pretty hot out there on that island. I've been in that area, in that region, and but I don't know, because I was only there at one time, I don't know how the seasons are all the time in that region. But I would look at it as probably a semi-warm to hot part of the country most of the time in that area. It's not too far from Jerusalem in that area.
I would think being out on that island, you could feel like isolation, maybe a sense of hopelessness.
Do you think that when they put you out on that island that they put you in like cages, like cells or whatever, do you think the food was good, the clothing was good, the water was in good, the facilities were good?
I think you would fend for yourself.
It might be fending for yourself around some criminals that
yeah.
maybe are some pretty bad dudes, maybe.
Murderers and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, where the